Hello and welcome to this week's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide advice and share knowledge amongst business owners. If you would like to keep up to date on our latest webinars, please make sure you follow us on SlideShare or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also access all of our resources for business owners by downloading the BizSmart app. Our presenter joining me today is BizSmart Core Advisor Louise Blunt. Just before we start the webinar, can I ask you all to use the question mark function on your screen to post any questions that you may have for Louise, and she will do her best to answer them all at the end of the session. Thanks, Louise. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm back for my third session on lean management, and this time I thought what we'd talk about was lean for non-manufacturers, because I think most of us really do think that lean is a manufacturing process tool, when actually, from my point of view, it absolutely isn't. So the first question, and I'm assuming that those of you who are listening are actually on the right page, but when you're talking to other people, lean doesn't apply to me. Well, three key questions. Do you have people in your organization? Do you have processes that create output services or products? Or do you experience problems? And if you can answer yes to any of those, and to be fair, if you're in business, everyone can answer yes to those questions, then lean is for you, and it doesn't matter what area of business you are in. In fact, lean for non-manufacturing has been around for a very long time. There are a lot of books out there which have taken the core learnings from the original lean manufacturing and applied them very successfully in non-manufacturing, in service industries, in the national health. It can be found all over the place now. So a brief history, and one of the reasons for sort of bringing this up is actually people think that lean is a modern philosophy and a modern idea. In fact, it's been going since the 1850s, and it all started really, you're right, with manufacturing, when we started doing things in a more process orientated way. So right from the very early age of manufacturing, we started to use and think about lean processes. And expectations have changed. When we first started, it was very craft-based, things were specialist, lots and lots of variation. These days, and I know there are still some craft organisations out there, but even in craft organisations, people require consistency, they require the high quality. They require us to produce things at, we could say low cost there, but at a reasonable cost. So value for money is very much a thought in most people's minds. But what people really want is some kind of consistency. So what are the lean fundamentals? Well, the lean fundamentals are the same regardless of what industry you're in. And fundamentally for me, it's a different way of thinking. It's just a different approach to running a business. And it's being able to, if you like, stand back, see the big picture, take stock of your business and understand that although you have lots of different individual things going on within a business or within an organisation, all of those things link together somehow. You cannot do one thing in one part of the organisation without it affecting something in another part of the organisation. And I think that's one of the things that most often gets forgotten. I can do this in finance and it won't affect anybody. Well, it will. The other thing I always tell people about lean is it isn't rocket science. The one thing that really infuriates me about a lot of lean practitioners is that they talk in Greek, basically. They talk in a language that I and most other people don't really understand. If you dig down and look underneath the surface of all of this, lean is just really the application of some simple thought processes and some common sense. So, lean thinking. Well, I found this cartoon a while back, and I actually think it really sort of encapsulates a lean thinker. Three glasses there. The optimist, and I am an optimist, and my glass is always half full. My glass is never half empty. But obviously the lean thinker is thinking, why is the glass twice as big as it should be? And that is the fundamental difference between the two. If we only need half a litre, then why are we using a litre glass? There's an awful lot of waste in all of that. So I hope that encapsulates lean thinking for you in a very simple cartoon. works for me. So we're going to look at some very simple lean tools, and I think those of you who've been involved in webinars of mine in the past will take one look at that list and go, what's the difference? Fundamentally, there is very little difference. And I did read something very interesting that talked about, lean tools and lean in the non-manufacturing environment. And actually the tools and the processes are remarkably similar. You may have to adopt them in a very slightly different way. You may take a slightly different tack when actually examining some of the problems that you've got. Because within an office environment particularly, and within a service environment, things are perhaps not as easily identifiable as straightforward or as straightforwardly linear. You follow a process of manufacturing, they have to go from one process to another, to another, to another in a set sequence. And when you're thinking about it from an office environment, you don't always see that linearity. But I can guarantee if you break down most of the things that you do into their simple constituent parts, you'll find that they do follow, or they should follow, a process. And if they're not following a process, then there's obviously room to adopt some lean principles there. So the simple lean tools, and I am going to rush through in very whistle-stop fashion. And perhaps if I get some feedback from you, what we might do in future webinars is look at things in more detail. Certainly process mapping, value stream mapping, those kind of things. We could spend an entire webinar doing, but I don't really want to put you to sleep. So we're going to just whistle-stop through all of those. So 5 whys, one of my favourites, the 7 or 8 wastes, 5S, process mapping, value stream mapping, and trends and variance analysis, which is one of my favourites. I'll also be touching on other things, which if you want to look them up on the internet, you'll find them under things like systems thinking and things like that. Well, I won't be referring to them as systems thinking, but if you want to do further reading, have a look at that as well. So the 5 whys, or in my case, the 5 whys and a what. I actually think it's really important to have the what at the end, because once you've got to the end of the 5 whys, it's what you do with it that's actually fundamentally critical. So what do we mean by 5 whys? Well, again, very simple tool. Something's gone wrong. Now, when something's gone wrong, the first thing we say is, well, why did that happen? Because if we don't ask why it went wrong, then it will happen again and again and again. But how often do we stop at the first why? So I'll give you an example. A clinic had to turn away some patients one morning. Why was that? Well, the scheduled staff didn't turn up. So your first thought when the scheduled staff didn't turn up was possibly, well, unreliable staff, what a waste of time they are, let's get straight into the disciplinary procedure, blah, blah, blah. So it would be really easy to jump to a conclusion about why the staff didn't turn up. But you ask why. You ask the staff, why didn't they turn up? Well, the reason why they didn't turn up is they didn't know they'd been scheduled for that day in that clinic. Ah, okay. So it wasn't the staff at all. It was another reason. So you could then jump off down all kinds of avenues and say, well, what's gone wrong here? And, things didn't work and all the rest of it. So, but just ask the reason why. They didn't get the text or the email to tell them that they were scheduled. And then you could start to imagine what the problem might be, that, the phone lines were down or that the computer didn't work, or you can go on and imagine all kinds of scenarios. But all you need to do, rather than head off in different directions, doing different things that actually have absolutely no effect on me, is ask another why. Well, what it turns out is that texts and the emails were sent, but they weren't received. So then you start thinking, oh, the server's down, the server's messing around, oh, BT, oh, goodness gracious me. Well, actually, the 5th why will get you to the reason. And that was those particular members of staff had changed their phone numbers, but they failed to communicate it back to the company. So actually, you could have, in the course of those 5 whys, spent a lot of money, taken a lot of time, done an awful lot of things that actually had absolutely no relevance whatsoever to the initial problem of why the clinic had to turn away some patients. And the simple answer to it was that phone numbers had changed. And so all you need to do within a company is just make sure that you continue to update and keep up on top of people's phone numbers. A very simple and very uncostly answer to the problem. So I hope that illustrates why 5 Whys is really good. Is a really good tool as far as I'm concerned. It's a very simple tool. It doesn't cost you anything. You might not need all 5, but often 5 will get you. It'll get you down to that nitty-gritty level that really tells you what you need to do. And of course, the what at the end is, well, having found out why the whole thing fell apart, it's what do you do about it? Because if you don't do anything about it, then, well, there you go. Why should you be in business? So this is quite a busy slide, but this really is one of the main tenets you'll hear about lean, which is all about identifying waste. Much of the waste is very similar between both manufacturing and non-manufacturing when you look at the headlines. So wherever you look at it, you will see transportation, over-processing, waiting, motion, defects, inventory, and overproduction. They form the acronym TIMWOOD. But if you look underneath the surface, they actually refer to different things. So under transportation, we're talking about retrieving and storing files, paperwork, we're talking about moving equipment around. Overprocessing, things like different layers of approval. Now, if you've got something that needs to get out to a customer, but it has to go through 6 layers of approval before it's allowed out, you know, that is an awful lot of time delay and an awful lot of wasted opportunity. Duplication is a key thing of mine. You know, I really find it really hard when organisations are doing the same thing twice, or even 3 times, and sometimes even 4 times, just because we want to make sure. There's something fundamentally wrong with the process if it has to go through that many levels of duplication. Waiting for the system to come up. How often do you sit there in the morning waiting for the computer to boot up, waiting for equipment to be available, waiting for a co-worker to be ready? So there's an awful lot of waiting going on. Motion, in this case, you know, you're going to look at the second one and go, extra keystrokes and excessive mousing? Goodness sake. But if you actually think about how many times, I find it really frustrating. You know, if I'm on a website, how many clicks do I have to do to get to this thing? Because it's about making things nice and quick and easy and simple. It might just be seconds, but if you add all the seconds up and all the minutes up and all the hours up, it's an awful lot of waste. You know, defects, data entry, errors, things being inputted incorrectly, missing information, anything that means that you have to spend more time going over it, or that there's a fundamental opportunity for something to go wrong. An inventory, you know, office consumables and supplies are obvious, but anything that isn't complete, so we look at open projects and backlogs, anything that isn't complete from a service industry point of view is inventory. It's something that hasn't got to where it needs to get to. So I think you can see the others. The 8th waste, and this is one that really, and this applies to all areas, but actually it comes into its own, particularly when we're talking about non-manufacturing, is skills misuse. And we are very guilty of that in small businesses. So continually using a higher skilled person on lower skilled work. So how often do you see the chief executive or the MD or somebody doing something like wrapping parcels or doing something like that? And I am not demeaning that level of work, but actually what the chief executive or the MD should be doing is working on the high level strategy, working out where the business should be going, finding the right sales. So how do you make sure that you are not continually wasting opportunity by using skills incorrectly? I mean, I'm a classic example of that. I am absolutely hopeless with technology, but I will sit in front of my computer for 2.5 hours fighting with it furiously, when actually what I really should have done is pick the telephone up and spoke to somebody who knows what they're talking about and can fix it in 5 minutes. That's skills misuse. So there, that just gives you a quick idea of the 7 or 8 wastes. And the whole idea behind lean is just to be aware of those, to understand that they exist. And I think just having a list like that sometimes makes you think, oh, blimey, yes. Okay. And as with everything else, it's a bit like doing your SWOT analysis. It's great writing it all down, but fundamentally it's what you do about it that's important. So how do you ensure that you are keeping those 8 wastes to a minimum? And that's where some of the tools that we're just about to talk about come into their own. So some of the more well-known lean tools, which is how do we address some of these wastes. So let's start with 5S. 5S, why 5S? But well, because we're using the letter S to start every particular section of it. I can never remember the original Japanese versions. They're all S's as well. But I much prefer to use the ones that we have here, which is basically sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. And what we really mean by that is, I think there are very few of us in the world who are that tidy and that clean-minded that we deal with everything immediately. You know, you put things to one side, oh, I'll deal with that later, or I'll look at that later, and then what you end up with is a pile of stuff you don't need, you've not referred to for months, it's become outdated, but it's still there on a just in case, well, I might need it, well, I've forgotten it was there kind of basis. So the first thing to do is to sort. So take a look at your office and get rid of all the stuff and the dross and everything else that you've been piling up for months. And look in the filing cabinets as well. You know, what things are out of date? What things do you no longer need? I'm going to come to doing 5S on data in a minute. And then, you know, put it all in order. Make sure that you set your desk up in the right order. Make sure that you've got all the things that you need on a regular basis to hand, so that you can just reach out and pick them up. If you were actually sitting with me doing this website, I'm actually reaching out and picking them up. It's quite sad, really. What do we mean by shine? Clean and inspect, or inspect through cleaning. Well, what we're trying to ensure there is that everything's actually working, because it's no good having the thing in its place if it doesn't actually work. So the shine element of it is to keep it tidy, keep it in good working order, so that when you reach for it, you don't, oh, do you know, I knew that last week that went off and I didn't do anything about it. So it's about having that. It will take you longer if you leave it than if you fix it at that point. So get it fixed. And then within an office environment, and this is where process mapping and things really comes into their own when we're looking at processes, is have some simple rules to follow. I won't go into that in too much detail because I've got a couple of slides coming up. And when we look at process mapping, that's really where you can see the real benefits of standardizing. And of course, there's no point doing it if you're not going to sustain it, if you're not going to make it part of the daily habit. I don't know about you, but I actually find it really, really cathartic and satisfying when I've actually done a 5S. I can't honestly claim that 6 months later I don't need to do another one, but you know, it's a really good exercise. And for that period of 6 months, I am far more effective and efficient because I know where everything is. There's nothing better than a visual. So 5S in your office before and after. Now, interestingly, I don't conform to the rule that you have a clean and tidy desk with nothing on it. To me, that is actually the epitome of inefficiency because you've then got to go find everything. So, you know, when I'm looking at 5S, I'm looking at a happy medium between having that office on the left, which is what mine does look like most of the time, and having a clean and tidy office. But having a system where you know you can reach for things very quickly. So don't get so tied into all of this idea that everything has to be spotlessly clean and tidy. Different people operate in different ways. If I tidied everything away, I would be monumentally inefficient. But know what it is that each individual needs for them to work. It's not the right thing for everybody to have nothing on their desks. So what I'm really saying is that Lean is as much about the people as it is about the systems. So when you are applying Lean within your organisation, just remember that everybody's different. So they may need to adopt a very slightly different outcome, and things may need to look slightly different, because Lean is not about processes, it's really about people. And again, some more quick examples, and just to give you just some ideas. You can even use it in terms of traffic, you know, having things or people come in at one side and out of the other. That avoids accidents and all kinds of other things. And I like the two on the left because they are real life examples of things that happened. And, you know, particularly when it talks about saving a nurse an hour each day, whether it's a drawer, whether it's a cabinet, a cupboard, whatever it is, if things are where they should be, you are spending so much less time looking for them. And we've all had a cutlery drawer like the one on the left. So the other thing I wanted you to think about is that just because you have a cupboard doesn't mean to say that you need to keep that cupboard the same. So you need to, here we go, I'm going to say something I really hate. You need to think outside the box. So just because your cupboard is formatted as it is on the left doesn't mean to say that that's how it should be for greatest efficiency going forward. So have that open-mindedness that enables you to look at a space and think how it's best used, rather than a cupboard with shelves. So I'm just going to talk very, very briefly about product flow. I mean, it's a very fundamental part of Lean thoughts. And I've chosen the two photographs there because obviously what we're talking about here is water flowing through a system. Sometimes, as in on the left, it needs to flow really quickly, and it may have a lot of things it needs to flow around and a lot of things we need to take account of as it's flowing around. But sometimes it needs to flow really quickly through an organisation, and we need to be able to manage that flow. Sometimes, as is on the right, it just needs to meander, and it needs time to flow gently through without the rush and the bustle. And it will be just as effective in the end. The really important thing, and perhaps I haven't mentioned this as strongly as I should, I kind of was relying on previous webinars for this, is that everything is dictated really by what the customer needs and when it needs them. So you need to set your organisation up so that the services will flow through it at the rate the customer needs them. And that does really need you to rethink some of your processes. So, you know, we all talk about being able to produce things in good time. So you need to have time to think about things, but you also need to remember that customers need them when they need them. And that sometimes you need to change the way you do things in order to really service the customer better. You know, we've always done it like that. You need to be thinking about a lean process. Because there will be a way of doing what you do better and more efficiently to get things out for the customer. So just a quick couple of seconds on flow. And then I am really going to whistle-stop tour through this. I just want to look at a simple process of value stream mapping. And really all that I want you to do is just sort of understand within an office environment how this might work. This is a typical... you could call it a quotation flow that might go through an organisation. Now, I've deliberately ramped up the hours, but I have worked with organisations where things take this long. And I really wanted you to look at, you start with the customer, so when the request comes in from the customer, and you finish with the customer, because at the end of the day, it's all about the customer. We don't do things, or we shouldn't be doing things, unless a customer needs them. Otherwise, why are we doing them? Now, everything has to be linked to what is relevant to getting what we need out to the customer when they need them. And that includes things like invoicing processes and all of those things that you might think of as internal processes. They're all related to customer and customer service. But this is a typical example. So what you can do here, and a really simple way of doing it, is just a post-it note exercise. Now, I understand if you're a one-man band, it's much better done if you've got 2 or 3 people or even a couple more doing this. So bring the whole team together and just ask them to write down what they think the quotation process is, as in this case, and how long each part of it takes. Do it separately and then just put the post-its up on a wall. What you should see is that everybody has the same processes in the same order, taking the same amount of time. I will guarantee you that you won't. This is why it's a real benefit to do it with more than one person. You will see that people do things differently in a different order. They take different amount of times to do it. And really that's the start of doing a simple process map and understanding that people do things differently. Even if you have ISO 9002 or whatever other quality system, people will still do things differently. So it's about bringing some standardization to the process. But the really interesting thing is when you've done your simple process map, then you ideally will look at the value stream, and I'll come to that in a minute. But even if you decide not to do the value stream, you will find real benefit to taking that process map and then actually doing something with it. So when you come on to doing process mapping, I've got a do's and don'ts on the next slide. But it's really important that you think about it as it actually happens, because what we then need to move on to is what needs to happen. So the two are very separate. Do not mix the two up in your head. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that in this process that we've got here, actually the whole process time is 24.8 hours. So if you add the white boxes, which is the time it actually takes to do those particular tasks. But what it's actually taking us from customer to customer is 239.8 hours. Because in between all those processes, things are hanging around or waiting for approval or waiting for somebody else to add some information to something for an extra 200 plus hours. That's an extreme example, and I chose an extreme example deliberately. But this is where the value stream mapping comes into its own, because what we are trying to do is to take away the waste hours, take away the waste time, and shorten the time. And that isn't just to the advantage of the customer. It's also to the advantage of the business very greatly, because A, you can do things more quickly, so you can turn more products around, you can get more things done. And you'll argue with me, okay, well in those 100 hours we're still doing other things. But I think if you can shorten things, if you can find out why the problems are there, you will be able to get your team, particularly when you're doing quotations, to get them out more quickly, and that will allow you to do more with them, because the vast majority of time that's just waiting time, and that's real waste. So that is just a quick idea of process mapping. So some do's and don'ts. I did mention earlier, do map the process as it actually happens. There is always a tendency when you're doing this particular exercise to go, well, it shouldn't really happen like that, should it? It should, and I'll write that down. Must resist that temptation, because what we're really interested in, we're not beating people over the head and body with this. This isn't an exercise to say you're doing it all wrong. It's an exercise to say this is how we do it, and actually how could we do it better? Because we can always do it better, and I'll come on to continual improvement later. So the do's are, get other people involved, define the beginning and the end as we did earlier, and keep it simple. Do not go into the tiniest little detailiest little thing, because you will lose people's interests. Keep it simple, keep it very clear. Work as a team. When you've done that process map, then you can look at it from the point of view of, okay, that's what is happening. How can we improve that? And again, work as a team. If you're on your own, then just engage the likes of us to come in and work with you on it. Because what you will find through doing a simple exercise like that, and it doesn't have to take you more than a couple of hours, is that you will find ways to do things better, to do things differently, to do things more efficiently, And all of those are an absolute benefit to any business. Right, here we go. The Deming Cycle. I don't often bring up names and give things these very technical terms. But again, what I wanted to do is, if you want to go away and look at this outside of the webinar, the Deming Cycle is what it's called. But this is all about really taking what you're doing in terms of your process mapping and things like that, and remembering that you have a start, so you plan, then you do, then you check that what you've done actually has a benefit. So we're looking at the process mapping. You plan what you're going to do, so you sort out what it is you're currently doing, then you make the changes and you do something about it. Then you need to check back and check, well, did that actually have the desired effect? And then obviously you act upon the outcomes of that. And one of the things I would recommend, and you may say, oh, blimey, why do we have to do it this way? Don't try and make too many changes at any one go. Because if you make a whole raft of changes all in one go, how do you know what it is that's actually made the difference? I think it's really quite fundamental that you make it. This is why we talk about the continuous cycle, that you do a quick plan, do, check, act. You change something, you check it's doing the right thing, then you quickly check the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And then you'll start to see trends and variances, the patterns emerging about what works and what doesn't. So although it may feel like a complete and utter, excuse my language, ball ache to actually do it that way, you can do this really, really quickly. And it becomes really, really effective in terms of identifying what it is that's working for you. Because that's the fundamental. You know, you need to be identifying what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And then you can put things aside that don't work and really just concentrate. We don't have the luxury of an infinite amount of time. So we can't go into any of these ideas and thoughts in any hugely minute detail. And I'll talk about Six Sigma in a minute, because that's where the minute detail comes in. We haven't got the time to do that. But we do have the time to do some quick snapping of the fingers, some quick actions, check what the results are. Great, that worked. It had a really beneficial effect. We'll do more of that. That actually didn't do what I thought it was going to do. My point being, if you change half a dozen things at once, you've no idea what worked. So just do them in quick, short, sharp bursts. But remember to keep doing them. So as you can see, once you've done the one, that becomes the standard. You then roll it to the next one, which becomes the standard. And all the time you're improving what you do. Six Sigma. Can't talk about lean without talking about Six Sigma, even though it's a subject that absolutely drives me insane and nuts. Because when people talk about lean, you tend to get into this, oh, well, you know, Six Sigma, it's such a vital part of lean, and unless you are doing Six Sigma, you are not doing lean. Absolute rubbish. Six Sigma is, as it says at the bottom, a system to eliminate defects right down to the very nth degree. And that's fine. If you are working in that kind of process environment where that's important to you, then absolutely take it on board. But if you are a bog standard, like we all are, the rest of the world, where we haven't the time, the investment capability to do that, then just think about Six Sigma from the point of view of what I think it means, which is this. You know, Six Sigma is the realization that 99% isn't good enough, and you think, oh God, of course 99% is good enough. That's perfectly good enough. But I've given you 3 examples there of 99%. If 99% of the time drinking water was safe, for 15 minutes a day it would be unsafe and it might kill us. At Heathrow, there would be 7 long or short landings at Heathrow every day. And what would that do for efficiencies? And we'd have no electricity for 7 hours each month. So, you know, we should always be striving to go that bit further. But for me, what it means is exactly what it says there. We're looking to produce what the customer wants, when they want it, at a fair price and with minimum waste. So just use the idea and the thoughts behind Six Sigma, which to me is it's the 1% that matter. It's that little incremental improvement. You know, to be honest with you, no improvement is too small, because if you're only improving by 0.5%, but you improve 8 things, that's 4% improvement. Now, who in the world wouldn't want to see a 4% improvement? Because that would probably increase your profit margins by about 20%. So these little incremental improvements are important, and that's really all I want to say about Six Sigma. It has its place, but just think about it from the point of view of it's an idea of continuous improvement, and it's those little 1% that matter. So I mentioned earlier about systems thinking. For me, that's a very fancy name for seeing the whole picture. And that's one of the things I think that when we're talking about BizSmart, this is what we really do help businesses to do. But it's about standing back and seeing that big picture, focusing on the whole system, and remembering that any system is a composition of lots of different systems within it. Any process is a composition of lots of different processes. If you make a change to one of those processes, you will almost certainly change something else in the organisation. And as it says at the bottom, and this is an argument I had frequently in my manufacturing days, is that you might need to make a change in one part of the organisation that means they have to work what they consider to be less efficiently. But actually, if they're changing their way of working makes the rest of the organisation far more efficient, then that is what we should be doing. So avoid this silo mentality that many people get into of doing things in individual areas and thinking, if I'm doing it for this individual area, it will be right for the whole organisation. It might not be. I'll give you a classic example of something that happened to me a long time ago. I used to run big printing presses on 24/7 operations. And the finance department said, well, if we buy this paper, we can save 1% on our paper costs. Now, 1% amounted to several millions of pounds. So it seemed like a really good idea. I was adamant we should trial this paper on our machines. But to cut a long story short, it didn't happen. And the paper arrived, it went on the machines, and for the next 3 weeks, we had something like 50% downtime because the paper would not run effectively through our machines. So there you go. You think you're doing something really good in one part of the organisation, but it completely messes up the rest of the organisation. Cost us a fortune, and we eventually, thankfully, went back to the original paper. We didn't abandon the idea of finding a new paper that we could run efficiently through the machines and save ourselves money, but we went at it in a far more plan, do, check, act kind of a way, which is we'll plan to bring this paper in at a time when it's not really key for us to get it out. We will run some trials, we will work out what we need to do, how we need to change the settings on the machines to make it work. So we didn't abandon the idea, we just went back to adopt a better practice to get to the answer we needed. So seeing that whole picture, one critical area for me is balancing short and long-term perspectives. I really feel that in this day and age, we spend too much time on short-termism. You know, what's immediately in front of our noses and immediately in front of our faces. We really do need to understand that sometimes doing things for the short term really, really doesn't benefit the business in the long term. So part of Lean for me is about having the insight and the guts, if you like, to look at the longer term perspectives and actually creating that sense of balance in the whole organisation. And just because a picture is easier to understand than a whole load of nonsense words on a page, I found this. And this is a classic example. All these people, I don't know if you can see, but they're all blindfolded because they're all in silos thinking, what is this? And they've all identified this particular item as a different thing. It's an elephant. And that's where you can get blinkered and blindfolded about looking at things in too much minutiae, in too much detail. You know, take the time to stand back and look at the bigger picture. So I've gone through really quickly, and I hope you can see how this relates absolutely to service industries and other types of industry, and not just manufacturing. It very much is part of my DNA that I really fundamentally believe that lean has a place in every kind of organisation and in everything that we do. So in summary, we start by specifying what the value is in the eyes of the customer, then we map, then we eliminate the waste and the variation, we look at the flow of the work through the organisation, and we look to continuously improve to try and ensure that what we are doing is continually delivering not only better value for customers, but more importantly, better value for us as organisations, so that we have the opportunity to make more money, quite simply. If we are doing these things and we're selling particularly to a price point, the more efficiently and effectively you can do things, even if it's something as simple as, actually the office being tidier so you can get more quotations through. And if you can get more quotations through, you might land more and then you might have more work. It's a very strange journey that you might take. The two things on the right are fundamental to me. It's one thing I talk to a lot of clients about. You can't do any of this without getting off your proverbial. So if you just remember Goya, you can't do any of this sitting in a chair pontificating. You've got to get off your backside and go out there and talk to people in your organisation, talk to people outside your organisation, and really use their skills and expertise to get things moving on. And as I end all my presentations in exactly the same way, keep it simple. Thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you very much, Louise, for presenting today's webinar. I will be sending out a copy of the presentation and Louise's contact details to you all very shortly. So please do email her direct if you have any questions. So before we close, just a quick reminder, if you would like to keep up to date on our latest webinars, please make sure you follow us on SlideShare or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also access all of our resources for business owners by downloading the BizSmart app. That's the end of today's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Thank you all for listening, and we hope you can join us again very soon.